How did we get here? This topic has really evolved over the last 5 years. Started out as a skeptic, and here we are doing expeditions in Xicuco Mountains at the base of Xicuco Hill, the Hill of the Owl. If you may have seen my previous video on Xicuco, it's a pretty mysterious place. The legends here with the Cave of Diablo and the Watcher mentality with the owls. It's quite the place. Many pieces have been found on and around this hill. As you can see, the guys here are digging on a pendulum hit. They started to find some pieces. This was the first one that came out. It's a really interesting piece. You know, it's got some pre-Hispanic vibe to it, but it also is made of the classic stone here, which is like a geopolymer. And you may have seen some of our videos on this stone. We just actually got back from the lab and did a bunch more research on it, and I'll be sharing that here in the near future. So you can see that this is magnetic, and how bizarre. The stone itself isn't magnetic. They actually inlay an ore into it, which we just did some testing on as well. And it's quite bizarre. Some of the magnetic principles of these pieces are fairly basic like this. Others are far more complex with, prediction mechanisms and different sorts of levitation and movement. Also, possibly even some sort of energy device or something that can make a dish turn around. And this dish that we found was 20 or 30 pounds. So it's quite interesting to see the full spectrum of where this started and where it's going. A lot of these pieces that were uncovered in this expedition have the Boogosphere chip, which we've now documented coming out of the ground prior to the Boogosphere crash. Back in January, we have a sphere coming out of Abuelos with the chipset on it, which is quite interesting to me because most of them came out afterwards. We had been documenting spheres and things on these pieces for years, since the very beginning. I mean, even the early pieces that Nassim Harriman and Klaus Dona and people of that nature, Scott Waltar brought to the table. You would see these little spheres and things going on these pieces, and didn't really think a lot of it. Now we've actually got metal spheres. We've got the one that crashed, but we've also got ones that have been found here in Tula. And so we did some research on those here recently in the lab as well. All of these things will be getting individual videos to go over the science, because the science is quite deep. There's a lot to it, and there's still a lot more that needs to be done. But I want to keep everybody on the same page at all times and just kind of go into some of these hypotheses and show what AI is saying about it, because it's quite interesting to see. Some of the stuff comes up. It's very cut and dry. It does seem to really know what it's talking about in terms of electron microscope, EDS type scanning analysis, different sorts of composition of rocks, even just from quality pictures of stones. I've been able to get a lot of information regarding, is it jade, is it onyx, is it, there's certain stones that look very similar, aventurine. So to get these things analyzed, I know as a rock collector how to do some of that, but I also ask AI just for, second opinion, and it's really on the money with analysis. So when I started punching in some of these stones from Tula, it wasn't able to give me examples. You can see all the rocks that have been removed from this dig site. Those rocks, it'll tell you all about them. But as far as this yellow stone here, you can see coming out of the ground all the time, it's absolutely something on its own. It's manufactured, cut and dry. And they were able to manufacture this stone in a very peculiar way. They were able to control the tensile strength of it and create, large stele like this. They were able to produce all kinds of different boxes, tables, park benches. I mean, they really had the full control, and everything was completely covered in carvings, top to bottom in most cases. So the mold theory, it only goes so far here. Everything is so unique and individualized. It would be impossible. You'd find traces of the mold somewhere. There's none. We've never found anything like that, let alone molding something like this big. Looking at these pieces, I mean, there's everything from a bell here to, I don't even know what to call some of these obviously large steles and story tablets, these crystal skull boxes. There is some functional, pieces like these vessels and maybe like a mortar pestle there with a ball in there as the piece to crush things up. Got vases and pitchers, cups, all that sort of stuff is fairly common to be found with this stuff. However, 99% of the time it's decorated very heavily. It's not just a standard piece of something. It all seems ceremonial to an extent, or that it has some sort of purpose. You can see that piece with the rhombus on the top of it, the crystal in the center, the way it lets light through and how it illuminates to create the design in the carvings. It's something else. This was a really productive day digging here, and what was found is definitely more pieces to the puzzle. A lot of Bogosphere influence once again from the pendulum, and I don't know what to say, other than it's weird, and it seems to be doing something and guiding it in a way to open the story a little further each time. And kind of scary, some of the things with the black goo in Panama and the Bogosphere and these Nazca mummies. There's just a lot of weird evidence like the Nazca mummies and the Bogosphere that connects with this and disclosure. It's hard to argue at this point. The purpose and meaning behind these pieces is really a big mystery to me still. Is it ceremonial completely? Are they the idols that worship these gods that it talks about that caused the fall of Babel? Was contributing to the fall of Babel? It's hard to say. The iconography that we see really points towards a time of Tiamat, or the reproductive goddesses that it talks about in many cultures. We see a lot of that type of influence side by side with Saturn, and that can kind of go with the Gnostic texts. We see a lot of the bull horns like you would see in Egypt or Mesopotamia. Enki was one who had 4 horns, so it's kind of interesting to see. The Anunnaki as well had horns. So I really don't know. I really don't know the connection here between the Anunnaki and Egypt, or how Egypt is the way it is, because a lot of these figures, they look the same, like Sobek here. But then a lot of the figures, obviously the people around them, they look completely different than the Egyptians do. So was Egypt a completely different reset, and this was a whole different species prior to, that the same gods manipulated? I definitely think that's a plausibility at this point. It does seem that might be the case with the Anunnaki and Sumerian stuff. A lot of these cultures like Egypt, they credit these gods for giving them language and tools and metallurgy and all of this science, and so that's consistent in multiple places around the world. And I definitely think that we're seeing a part of this story in an illustrated format at this point that really would be hard to argue that that's not maybe the case. And especially with the reverence of corn and different ancient grains that we see from Mexico, the story definitely adds up. As you've seen, beings with 6 arms and serpent tails, there's a vast amount of different species and types of beings that we find. And seen beings with 2 heads. We've seen beings with 1 eye. We've seen beings that look like the xenomorph off of the Aliens movie. We see these serpent-looking, mermaid-type beings, angel-looking beings. And, they always said the truth was set in stone. I never imagined it being like this. Seeing Egypt for what it was, it kind of gave reference to that statement, but the amount of depictions on these and the unfilteredness of it is Some of these pieces are just absolutely stunning. These guys holding up the world is something, or holding up these spheres is becoming a common depiction with the pyramid at their feet. And it's kind of an interesting observation. The cube also has been something that's been fairly common. In fact, actually a metal cube was found as well that has the Boogosphere symbology all over it. What the connection here is with this sphere and this chip design with this culture is still a complete mystery to us. We really don't have any idea how on earth this could be connected in any way other than we're finding it, and all of a sudden we're finding it a lot. And being is that a lot of these guys are using pendulum around the sacred mountain Xicuco. How they're being guided is alarming at the minimum. It's funny, around the world there seems to be a war zone or some sort of church or something covering up these ancient sites, making them almost impossible to research, even with the pyramids, and them doing these recent SAR scans. People like Trevor Garcia have been, more than fulfilling in terms of the evidence and the logic, in terms of at least getting more research done on this topic and what the potentials are and what the data shows. I feel that the fact that there hasn't been any probing to that done yet is really a sign of stalling. That this is something, and like Zahi Hawass said in one of his interviews, you can't just go drill into the pyramid. And I get it, there's structural concerns and there's things that need to be verified, but then there's also other methods too that are non-invasive that could be being done right now, like complex GPR, other types of mappings and things that could absolutely give us a little bit more cause. So there's been doors and things that haven't even been opened in certain temples and shafts and monuments over there. The fact they know they're there and they don't open these things, it's a concern after seeing this stuff. We're seeing a lot of mythological beings, things that were talked about in the Greek a lot, and it's interesting because in ancient Greek history we have so many beings and places and different things. But what's really crazy is that a lot of these places actually exist. The monuments are there today. So it's almost as if mythology was a previous reset. And, they say humanity started 8,000 years ago or something like that. Well, humanity, that might be right on the money. I think there could be real truth to that. But I also think there's truth to this, whereas there was a very advanced species and gods that walked with man. And I think they call it man in this case, but these were not human. They were different. And, you look into the creation story over in Mesopotamia, and you see a lot of relevance to this is a potential thing that happened. Like the Ajiji, for instance. The Ajiji fell with the Anunnaki. And they were their slave species. So it's a real plausibility that they had a very advanced thing going, which would explain some of this technology and things that we're seeing. And maybe they had too much power, and that might be why certain things were adjusted on us as a species. And when I say adjusted on us as a species, I mean genetically manipulated at one point or another. There's been a lot of mutations and things that have happened in our history, in the fossil record, that are literally impossible to occur. The odds are just not there. Some of them were double impossible odds, which there's a set number of, 10 to the 100th or whatever it is that becomes impossible. I'm not sure if that's the right number. I don't think it is, but there's something of that nature that declares something as impossible. And the mutations that occurred on our chromosome and different things about our genetic, success here, it seems as if we were the star of the show, and everything was kind of created around us in some respect. That sounds really narcissistic in some ways, but at the same point, it's hard to argue the amount of Goldilocks zones that are involved in our success and survival here. It doesn't seem like accidental Darwinian evolution at this point. It just doesn't seem like that. It seems as if that's kind of the case, but it also seems as if someone or something deliberately had the ability to fast forward on some of these evolutions based on need. And we find depictions of house cats and things with genetic material around them, with the angels doing things, with the sun and the planets and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's absolutely possible they mutated multiple species on this earth, and that's why we have pets, but we also have wild animals. One thing's certain, though, the mystery continues to grow. The questions amount more and more every day. Even though the answers are coming in, I still have more questions. We'll keep digging, and I'm sure the story will continue. Seeing the sacred geometry, the Vesca Pisces, this boogid ship, the sickle, the crook and flail, the ankh. There's just so many symbols, constellations, star maps. I came into this as a skeptic, but a hoax of this caliber was far more skeptical than this being reality at this point. Way too many things are historically correct with way too many cultures on the earth for this to be not the real thing, in my opinion, let alone the large amount of science that defies what we know about many objects. Really makes us scratch our heads. Till next time.